Hi guys, Squintina here, and today I'm going to be attempting a blue mage video. And I say attempting because I've already attempted to record this like, I don't know, 7 times. And every time I'm just like, nope, do over, this is crap, let's do this again. So I'm going to apologize right now for how disorganized this is going to be, because if I keep expecting perfection, I will never finish this. Anyway, blue mage is going to have multiple setups. We're going to have a healer setup, a tank setup, a DPS setup. These are going to be meant for people who are doing, well, the achievements to try to get their mobile mounts. So it's going to be focused on single target. And the reason I have to say that is because although many of the attacks do AoE anyway, the fact is we only get 24 spots. And that's very little. Okay, if you add up 24 to the rule actions, there's 4 of them, that's 28. That's actually, I think, the same or less as a white mage. It's very few actions, which is really sad considering that there are 80, and while a lot of them are essentially repeats with slightly different flavor, there will be sacrifices made, and I don't like that. I really don't. Anywho, that aside, let's start with our role actions, because that will be common across all of the setups. I've attempted to organize this somewhat, but we'll see. Role actions. Add-all goes here. Lucid, Surecast, Swiftcast. This is the same as what we have for Red Mage, and well, if you've seen my other caster setups, you know where those go. For those of you who don't know, the reason it's repeated is because set 3 is the set that's being used for my double. That's when you press the button twice. So this is right trigger, this is right trigger times 2, left trigger times 2. This can be configured, for those of you who may not be aware, in character configuration, hotbar settings, enable cross hotbar, hold, always display, because personally I like to see my cooldowns, and then you can pick which hotbar it is right here in custom. We're also going to be using something called an expanded, which is when you do left and right, or right and left. That's right here, right above it, and I'm going to be using crossbar 2 for that. You can use different ones. If you do, and you decide to use any of the setup macros I have in the description, you're going to have to adjust. Sprint does not get allocated. You can if you want to. I use system configuration, gamepad settings, button configuration, macro 99 right here. And you can see macro 99 is my sprint. This is not a loss, because the thing that's bad about macros is the lack of action queuing, which is the ability to, while you're doing something, queue up the next action. Sprint, even regularly, cannot be queued at all. So there is no loss for that. It works the same either way. You may want to put it into like a separate hotbar for visibility, and since we're going to have space, you certainly can put it maybe on the double if you want, but I'm not going to include that as part of the setup. Goodbye, Sprint. Next up, we're going to put in actions that are going to be common across multiple setups. So, Angel Whisper is our base. This is very important if you're going to be doing things like Coils or Alexander. Once again on our double, Angel Whisper. I will be attempting as best as I can to keep the rules that I have from various roles as close as possible. But because Blue Mage can do multiple roles and there are certain conflicts, well, some things may have to be changed, and that's the very next one. Diamondback would be the equivalent of like Paladin's Hallowed Ground, which would go here, where Swiftcast is. So, you're going down below. If you're a person that primarily, like, as your main job, the thing you play the most, uses my tank setups, you may want to switch those, but Otherwise, this is what I'm expecting, probably because I'm a healer main, so I like having my swift cast and my res in the same location, but adjust is necessary. You're also going to need Aetherial Mimicry, the thing that actually gives you the various boosts that you need when you do the jobs that you do, well, the roles that you do. We're going to put that right up here on the D-pad because you don't want to be using this super often. Matter of fact, if you want to put it into some other hotbar that we won't be using, maybe 7, don't think I'll need set 7, and just manually put it on, that's something you can absolutely do. You don't need to put it on your double, but we're going to have the space thanks to being 24 actions, so I'm going to put it here. But if you're afraid of accidents, feel free to move it. Next up, we've got White Wind. Now, if you're running as DPS and you are completely out of space and you really want to take something that's not as part of my setup, you might want to remove it. But in general, I am assuming that this is something people are going to want. Tanks want it, healers want it, and DPS may want it if they're really scared. Because tanks are squishy, which means healers are a bit busy, you know, healing them. So sometimes DPS might end up a bit forgotten. You may want to keep it just in case. Next up, damage. Now, for the most part, damage will be at the end, but there is one combo that is going to be the same across all of them, and that's Bristle with Song of Torment. Actually, there's multiple combos that will be the same, so here's Bristle, Song of Torment. Bristle powers up your next attack. For the most part, since it uses the GCD, it's not worth using, except for Song of Torment, because this is a dot that altogether does a 550 potency, so if you boost it, it's quite worth it. And it's the only one that's really worth doing this boost for. At least as far as GCDs go. Next up, we've got Peculiar Light and Off Guard. Chances are you're going to have to pick one of these as your active actions, but if you're able to bring both and adjust as necessary, that'd be great. I put them on the double. You can switch them, I don't care, but this is the order I use. Alright, let's see what else is next. Oh yes, Final Sting. That's a common action. So, once again, the setups I'm starting with are meant for bosses, not for dungeons. I'm talking trial and raid bosses for people who are doing their mobile mount and other achievements. So we're not really going to be using Self-Destruct because as far as single target goes, it is weaker. Final Sting is stronger. It goes right here. But in order to make it that strong, you need to have Whistle. And you need to have Flute. That's how you power it up as much as possible. The last common action, at least I think it's the last one, would be Blood Drain. You run out of MP, and for some reason your Lucid is not available, you can use it. You can choose to remove this one if you're a DPS, but if you're a tank or a healer, I would advise not to, because if you run out of mana by accident, you're going to really want it, or your party will probably wipe. Okay, that takes care of the more utility and common combos for really strong DPS for all of them. So let's move on to tank and healer specific things. Okay, it's time to tank. Let's go to set 4. That is the set I will be using as the primary hotbar for tank. So if I'm fighting, I can be on set 4. Switch to my double, it doesn't change the fact that my primary is set 4. 4. Same with my expanded, I can use it, it goes back to set 4. You don't need your primary to be set 1. At least not in my setups where I use a primary, a double, and an expanded. It just means you have to remember if for some reason you switched, like if you were going to 8, then come back. You know, if you have a menu somewhere, you need to remember that your tank is 4. But the reason I don't put any of them on 1 is because I save that for the Fate and Dungeon grind, specifically the Fame grind, because I tend to use 8 to access my mount. And so it's more natural for me to remember 8 goes to 1, because I do that all the time with all the other jobs. Tanking things. We've got our Fog Legs. That's our Provoke. A Veil is our Shirk. To be honest, you don't need to have a Shirk to do a tank swap. You know, you really don't. It's called turn your tank stance off. So it's not going to be a high priority action. I'm putting it on the hotbar in case you feel you need it, but it will most likely not end up in the active actions. Mighty Guard. Tank stance normally goes up top, even though I want the double to be things that are common across multiple, pools. Mighty Guard can stay here, it's fine. There we go, there it is, but if you want to bring it down, you certainly can. Likewise, we have Cat Guard. Cat Guard reduces target party members' damage taken by 5%. Not to yourself though, only to somebody else. So this is very common for an off tank, and normally I would put this on the double, either here or here. Obviously this one's taken, so I'm gonna put it right here. We've also got Condensed Libra, which is a buff. That's why it was in this section, which was buffs. And Toad Oil, which is more of a tanking mitigation thing. And that's what this section here was. There it goes. I'm going to put Toad Oil right here. It's something you activate. You do have to refresh it, but it lasts 3 minutes, so it being on a D-pad should be perfectly fine. Then we've got Condensed Libra, that lasts 30 seconds. And what it does is it boosts things based on what attack you use. This is considered kind of a bonus because it's only 5%, but it's still a nice bonus. Chances are the main tank is going to be the person bringing this, because since they're going to have Mighty Guard on anyway, their damage is going to be not very good. That's what Mighty Guard does. So if you're going to be having somebody put this buff every 30 seconds, a buff that does not do any potency whatsoever, you might as well give it to the person who is going to be doing the lowest damage of the entire group, which ideally should be your main tank. If it's not, well, that's a problem. But if for some reason the main tank is too busy, you can just give it to a DPS. Healers are going to be really busy, you don't want to give it to them. But if you absolutely have to, give it to whoever is willing to take the DPS hit. Question is though, where do we want to put it? And I'm going to put it over here. It's going to be used often enough that you might want to put it here. I need to stop misclicking him. Next up, healer specific things. Actually no, I'm wrong about that. There's one more tank specific thing. Bad Breath. So the reason for this isn't for the slow, the heavy, the bind, whatever. That's not for it. Additional effect, damage that reduced 10%. It's essentially an add-all. And it doesn't interrupt as well. So that's why you don't need to have your own specific interrupt. You can just bring Bad Breath. The last tank specific thing is going to be an attack. Now, I'm mostly leaving the attacks to the end, but you wouldn't be having a tank setup if you didn't have Zuluk, especially as a main tank. An off tank can bring something else, I suppose, but a main tank should absolutely be bringing this, because while you can get a lot of aggro with White Wind, that costs a lot of MP, so you may want to do it every once in a while, maybe at the very beginning to really grab that aggro as part of your opener, but for the most part, you're going to be using Zuluk to keep your aggro maintained. And now we get to move on to the healer setup. So, healing, right? Well, here's a section for things that can do heals. We've already assigned White Wind and Angel Whisper, because that's common for everybody, but we do have a few other ones as well. So, Palm Cure is essentially your Physic or Adlo. Well, Cure 2 really. It does a heal, it's strong. Gobskin is your Sucker. And then Exuviation is not only an AoE Asuna, but if you're a healer, as in Aetherial Mimicry healer, it also does a 300 potency heal. That will make it your Medica. And we're going to put these here. Transfusion I included when I brought literally every action so I could look at all of them. We're just going to ignore that one. Goodbye. Don't use it. It really should not be wasting a precious action. Unless you're doing some kind of meme setup, and if you are, you don't need to save that. So now we get to move on to the fun part, talking about damage. Before I really start to make the DPS setup and finishing the tank and healer setups to include, of course, the attacks they'll be doing, I think it's important to actually talk about how Blue Mage DPS works. So, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of using Final Sting and Self-Destruct. These are attacks that will kill you, but will do a lot of damage. I also mentioned that Bristle and Song of Torment are used to apply a very powerful dot. So, it's pretty common to use Final Sting or Self-Destruct to finish a boss, mostly Final Sting, and to keep your dot up at all times throughout the entire fight. But what about the rest? Right? So, we're going to ignore Self-Destruct and bring it down, because that's really an AoE and that will be different. And we're going to talk about all of the other actions. So, I've sorted them by potency. You've got your primal actions, and you do have to choose. I'll talk about them somewhere after. They do a lot of damage. They can be weaved. Mostly. This one not really so much, but they can be weaved. And then you've got these GCDs that are very strong compared to the other GCDs, but they have high recast. So if you look at the next ones that I have available, right, this is 220 potency. Let me bring it down. And that's what the look is, the one that we did for tank, 220. But these are 250, specifically these two. So they have high recast, but they do a lot of damage. We're going to want to use them for all of the setups. Not only that, but the tanks can also use Devour with, to restore some HP and increase their HP. And Magic Hammer can be used like an addle. So not only do they do a lot of damage, they're also utility. Everybody's going to be bringing those, because either you're using it for utility, like a tank, a main tank specifically, or you're using it for damage, which is everybody else. You've got Sharpened Knife. That is a 220 potency with a very short cast time. This makes it great for weaving. Like, unless your ping is absolutely terrible, you should be able to weave comfortably using Sharpened Knife. It is in melee range though. Then you've got all of the various 220s, including one that's already been moved, which is the Look. For the most part, you can pick what you want, but there is this thing that I put in on the tank setup called Condensed Libra. What it does is it will apply a random buff, physical, astral, or umbral. And based on that, attacks that have different elemental properties or physical properties will do an extra 5% damage. So ideally, and I do say ideally because once again, 24 actions, ideally you want at least one standard attack of each. One that counts as physical, one that counts as astral, one that counts as umbral. And if you pay attention to the buff, or you're one of those people that uses ACT triggers, whatever, you then adjust based on it. So the tank will be applying it every 30 seconds, the buff will change every 30 seconds, and you adjust accordingly. So that means you need at least 3 attacks that are 220 potency that are spammable. So Sharpened Knife already takes care of the physical, and then these we can adjust. The easiest way to know is every other, so fire, wind, lightning, and then you pick a 220 from here. Then you just switch it off. Pick a 220 from here. And if for some reason you don't have Sharpened Knife, this is how you find out what your physical actions are. But you really should be bringing Sharpened Knife for your physical. I guess if you have to, you can bring, one of these 200s, but you should be bringing your 220. There's also Sonic Boom. So notice Sonic Boom also has a very short cast time. Mine says 0.89. These other ones, Perpetual Ray Special is actually longer than the GCD. You kind of want to ignore that one unless there's something specific that you're doing with it. But the other ones are going to be just slightly shorter. You can still weave with them as long as you use action queuing. You may clip yourself a bit, especially if you have high ping for your next GCD. But you can do one weave with them. Ideally though, you really do want to use something that gives you more wiggle room. So if for some reason you're not bringing Sharpened Knife, there's also Sonic Boom. That one's a 210 potency, so it's slightly lower, but it has a massive range. This makes it ideal for healers because, fights have mechanics. You may have to be far, and so if you want to keep your uptime, you're going to want to use Sonic Boom. DPS may also want to bring both so that they can use whichever one is appropriate. And you use these very short attacks. You put it right here, so we have the 2 short ones together, to then weave in these primal abilities. And then after this, I have the 200 section. This is the AoE section. There's even a short one, actually 2 short ones as well. But this is for AoE, that would be for dungeons. Ideally, if they give us more space, I would say to bring some, so that way if a boss fight also has ads, you can use it. But, well, you're probably not going to have enough space to do that, so no. I'm really salty about the lack of space, if you can't tell. Some more attacks. This is good for AoE. This is somewhat good for AoE-ish. This is not good. This does a jump, but it's not worth it. And these are not exactly worth it either. Completely ignoring them. We don't need Flying Sardine, because our main tank's going to have bad breath. And 1000 Needles is not something you should use after you've hit level 30-ish? Definitely after 50 you shouldn't. Just don't. And our flat damage, our DPS are going to bring that. Probably not our tanks or our healers, because they won't have the space, because they have to bring their tank and healer specific abilities. Loom's useless. It's only good for the carnival or very specific things. Most of these, this is a knockback, we don't want it. Puts things to sleep. And once again, this is not going to be used for raiding setup. Can be used for fates though, in dungeons. Same with Chirp. Same with Petrify. Eerie Soundwave, unless somebody actually found a use for it in a fight, you don't bring it. And we don't need to use Stun, because we don't. If there's something that's interruptible, you use Interrupt. If there's something that's stunnable, unless there's some real benefit to it, then you can try to switch it out, but it won't be part of the standard setup. So all of these are just gone. Goodbye. Which means I need to start assigning active actions so that we can see how much space we have left to make these setups. Alright, so now we're going to work on the damage for the main tank. Off tank will have a slightly different version, so it's 2 setups. As mentioned, we're going to want to have these 2, especially Devour, because it can increase your HP, but also Magic Hammer to be used as essentially another add-on. Now, one way, if you don't want to have to go through the entire list, is to just use the bluespellbook command and the tab, and then Magic Hammer. I'm going to put Devour over here, and Magic Hammer over there. So as I mentioned, we only get 24 actions, and some of these I said might be optional. So Cat Guard, which is for tanks, is really more for an off tank, not a main tank. So you're gone. We're going to need you. A Veil, that's the shirt. Don't need you. You can do a 10 swap without it. Gone. If absolutely needed, Condensed Libra can be given to somebody else. But let's see if we can make it work exactly as it is. So let's go to our primal actions. We're of course going to want Super Naka. It's awesome, does decent damage, but we're going to want it. And it goes right here. Then Shock Strike and Mountain Buster share a cooldown, so it's up to you which one you want. I'm going to pick Shock Strike because a main tank should always have, well, the thing targeted, so it should be an issue. It shouldn't. Let me make sure I pronounce things correctly. It should not be an issue, so let's use Shock Strike. Then you have either Glass Dance or, you know, the one from Leviathan, which we're ignoring because it kind of sucks. So Glass Dance. And then you've got the ones that are, you know, down below. It's up to you which one you prefer. Tanks probably want Eruption, especially a main tank, because it will do all of the aggro up front. These essentially do the same amount of damage, so it really doesn't matter. And then you've got Quasar versus J-Cake. For a tank, you're going to want J-Cake. Makes it very easy for you to do your opener, to grab aggro, and you should pretty much always be near the boss, so for positioning purposes. So yeah, J-Cake. But it says I need more spots available. So, as I mentioned, you're going to want only one of these, and you're going to have to coordinate with your party members which one you're bringing. So we're going to remove one of them, but it can be either, and J-Cake. which will go in the double because that is where I have it for things that do jumps in other pulls. And you may want to use it for the other setups as well. You're going to have the choice of JK or Quasar. I think, technically speaking, Quasar comes out a bit better because of the buffs you might have, even though their initial potency is the same. But, I mean, if you prefer to have JK, that's fine too. It's a small difference. And that is the main solo tank. And notice I say 4, so I remember which one the primary hotbar is. Now you may have noticed that our main tank does not have a repeatable weaving window attack. Sure, it can use Devour to do it, can use Magic Hammer, but these are not very repeatable because of their really high recast time. That's just a DPS loss they're going to have to take. They can try to weave, and if it clips, it clips. They can just force clip it, and that's just the way it is. But they're going to have Mighty Guard, their damage is going to be low, and their primary purpose will be to tank. That's actually a thing for Blue Mage. That's the way it is. I'm not being like old-fashioned, that's the way Blue Mage is. But our off-tank, in fights where a tank swap is required, well, you have two choices. You can either have your off-tank bring the exact same setup as your main tank, in case something happens to your main tank and your off-tank needs to quickly become the new main tank, or your off-tank can have a second setup. So here's the version where you can have a slightly different setup. Since your main tank is taking care of Condensed Libra, you don't need it. Goodbye. But you need Cat Guard. So, you still don't have something for weaving. Your main tank will be using Bad Breath. You don't need it. And because of that, you, as the off-tank, can bring either Sharpened Knife or Sonic Boom. Really, it should be Sharpened Knife if you have the choice, because you should be chosen to do like melee mechanics. Sharpened. But if you prefer Sonic Boom, I mean, it's your choice. You can absolutely use that. And that is the off-tank setup. So they're going to share the same primary because they're so similar, but you just use one or the other. Okay, healer setup next. Fun. So, we're going to have space issues again, most likely. So once again, you're going to have to pick either Off Guard or Peculiar Light. Talk to your party members. Probably you're going to be using Peculiar Light and leave Off Guard for the tanks and 2 of the DPS, but you're going to have to talk. So one of them is Gun. And I just realized I didn't assign the healer specific ones. Be right back. Okay, our healer things are assigned, but let's move on to damage, right? So even though you're a healer and you will be doing a lot of single target healing most likely because of the way Blue Mage healing currently works and the way the damage is for the tanks, how much they receive, you will still have plenty of opportunities to do damage. So that needs to be somewhat optimized. You're going to need something for weaving. Once again, Sharpened Knife technically does more damage, but Sonic Boom gives you more range. Depending on the mechanics you're doing, that may be very valuable to you, so for the time being, let's just assume that you will only have Sonic Boom. And you're still going to want to have your primal spell so that you can do all of that sweet, sweet healer damage. So, Super Naka. You're gonna have the choice of Shock Strike or Mountain Buster. Since you're going to be healing the tanks a lot, you're going to have them targeted very often. So if you get back into melee range, you should be able to use Mountain Buster and that should be more comfortable. But if you're going to find yourself more in range, not melee range, you may prefer to take Shock Strike. So adjust as your preference is. Once again, class stance, there's absolutely no reason for you to be considering the other action that shares a cooldown with it, which is the Leviathan action. And then you have your ground target AoE. It's kind of a preference thing, which one you prefer. Really doesn't matter in your case. I like Eruption. I like to just not have to really think about it. All the damage at once. Let's go. And then you've got your choice of J-Kick versus Quasar. So, if you want J-Kick, you certainly can. The recommendation is to go with Quasar. There is a guide that will be linked at the bottom that goes over why these are better. This is not all of it mine. A lot of it I figured out for myself, but I of course refer to a guide to make sure that it will be correct. So, where do I put this? Well, in this case, we'll just go somewhere. You can move it around, but since J-Kick is taking its spot here, and you can see you don't have it, you can put Quasar wherever you feel like. So you're able to weave, you have the things to weave it with, but what if you want to do regular damage, something with 220 potency? And also, we still need our 250s because, hey, it's extra damage. So we need our magic hammer. And we need Devour. It gives us 2 actions left, and that kind of sucks. Why does it kind of suck? So Condensed Libra, as I believe I went over, but who knows, I've done so many different takes, I don't remember if this version will actually have it before or not. But you're going to want something that is fire, wind, or lightning. And as you can see, of the ones we have so far, Sonic Boom does count as wind. It's 210, not 220, but it counts. And then you're going to want something from Earth, Ice, and Water. And we don't have any. The ones you see, they're not GCDs. Those are abilities, they don't count. I'm talking about things you can use while the buff is active over and over. So at that point, you will want Planecracker or Northerlies. I guess you could take Protean Wave, some people may not enjoy having the knockback. Talk to your party about that one. Personally, I actually like to be in melee range whenever possible. I actually would prefer to take Sharpened Knife and not Sonic Boom, but if I'm going to choose one or the other, I'll take the one that does allow me to be ranged. But whenever I don't have to be ranged, I actually do like being in melee range. So I'm going to choose Planecracker. But if you want to pick Northerly so you can get the Conal, or Protean Wave, because you don't even need to target anything. I don't think you need to do it for Northerlies either, so either one. Go ahead. it's got a much longer range. It's 15 yards, so it really is your preference. And that means we have one action left for our physical. You could take Sharpened Knife, which I do like. And now you have one of each. But that means that for the one that classifies as the original one, Fire, Wind, and Lightning, now you have one that's only 210 and not 220. So this is where you have to really ask yourself, do I want to take the loss here so that way I can have the physical in case a physical buff arrives? Or do I tell my main tank, hey, if it ends up as physical, you need to re-roll it, or at least attempt to re-roll it, and instead bring something else that also fits. So that's going to be very much an up to you kind of thing. I believe the guide, somebody made a picture of it, and that one goes with losing out on Sharpened Knife. I really like Sharpened Knife, so I'm not going to lose out on it. I'll take the slight loss on Sonic Boom for when it's, you know, that version. Otherwise, no. Because we do have Sharpen in other things, let's switch them. So, Tank Cracker, Sonic Boom, Sharpen. Now it matches the tank setup slightly. Obviously, the off tanks don't, even though they do more damage than the main tank, they still don't have that, you know, big choice of how to adjust for extra damage based on the Condensed Libra. They'll just have to take what they take. This is the healer setup. Last but certainly not least, our DPS setup. So, I'm sure you can guess, once again, we're going to place our actions. You have a lot more freedom. You really can go based on what it is you prefer. So, we're going to have Super Naka. That's required. And then you get to pick Shock Strike or Mountain Buster. Whatever you prefer, doesn't matter. Pick one. Doesn't matter anymore. Glass Dance. And then you pick either Feather Rain or Eruption. Still doesn't matter. Pick what you prefer. And then we've got Quasar or J-Kick, and I dragged Quasar before so it's not showing, but once again this will be a matter of preference. Quasar can do more damage depending on how your buffs are, because J-Kick is physical, and ideally with Libra you will have the one that matches it, so Quasar is recommended. You're still going to want your big 250 potency attacks, Magic Hammer and Devour. And you're still going to want to have your weaving capabilities. Since you're a DPS and you don't have to take, other actions that are specific to DPS, you're going to want both of these. Unlike the healer, where they have to choose whether they want to take both of these and lose out on a 220 that would fit with what Sonic Boom can do, you don't have to choose. You can have both. Now let's go look once again here. So for our physical damage, we've got Sharpened Knife, it's 220 already, it's beautiful, perfect, love it. For our Fire, Wind, and Lightning, we do have Sonic Boom, but why would you want to just have Sonic Boom when you can have something that's 220? So grab a 220 spell, I don't care which. We can go for Electrogenesis, that seems to be popular. Because of the way it does its AoE, can be really nice. Oh, right, I was distracted. And then, within our Ice, Earth, and Water, we've got Planecracker, once again, or Ram's Voice, and Protean Wave, and Northern Leaves. So you've got choices, pick which one you prefer, it really doesn't matter, but this one is a point blank AoE, so is this one, Ram's Voice. This one's got a knockback that could be possibly annoying, but could also be possibly helpful, and Northern Leaves is a Como. Just pick what you like. So in your case, you can actually have Off Guard and Peculiar Light both together and adjust as necessary if you would like to do that. But what if you don't? So, Sharpened Knife, which we are using as our physical, only has a range of 3. Abyssal Transfixion is also physical and has a range of 25. So if you decide, once again, talk with your party members who's bringing Peculiar Light, who's bringing Off Guard, it should be 4 and 4, for people with one, for people with the other. Whichever one you are not bringing, you remove. And you can bring Abyssal Transfixion. So that's a physical attack where you can actually be really far. So if there is a physical buff and you have to be far for a mechanic, you don't have to lose DPS, and that's a good thing. Right here. And you can repeat Planecracker, so that way you can have the same pattern. It's just this one's gonna have 2 weaving windows, and this one does not have big weaving windows. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, but what about flat damage? Flat damage can be nice. Some fights do allow you to use it. You should check a fight chart to find out whether or not, you can use things like level 5 death or missile. Really, those are the only 2 you need. You don't need to bring the others, you certainly can. You've got your choices. But if you want to bring the others, you're going to have to make concessions. So what concessions can a DPS make? White Wind, right? You're in a party, you have a healer, you have tanks that will also be doing White Wind for their aggro. You should not need to bring White Wind, so goodbye. You also ideally shouldn't need Blood Drain, because most of these actions, especially with White Wind gone, don't use a ton of MP. The only really big MP spenders are your Angel Whisper, hopefully you don't have to use it too often, and your Diamondback. So as long as you make sure to use your Lucid Dreaming, you should be fine, if it's a fight where you can bring it, to grab Missile and level 5 death. And that's the DPS setup. But there is one more thing. we're going to look at this again. So I put Whistle, then Moon Flute, then Final Sting, because that's actually pretty much the order you'd be doing them in. You can make some adjustments, but for your finisher, because you'd be using this ideally when you're trying to finish a boss fight, this is a great combo. The thing is, DPS also use Moon Flute as part of their opener. Tanks and healers really should not do that, except maybe the off tank, as long as they don't need to do like any kind of tank swap in the next 30 seconds. They can do that, 15 seconds. And healers really shouldn't, because it's, well, if you can't heal, your tank could die. But DPS can use this as part of their opener. And chances are you'll be doing that after reaching up here. So it might be more comfortable to also, in addition, bring Moon Flute here. Now this will still show up if you're tanking or healing, so you still get that choice of using the version here, but it's really meant more so for the DPS. If they're doing their opener, they'll be using Moon Flute here. If they're doing their finisher, Moon Flute there. That is the DPS setup. Fully done. You can't heal yourself or restore mana other than lucid dreaming, so be careful. So the last thing I was going to make is a general Fate and Dungeon setup. To be honest, if you're running as a tank or a healer, you should just start with that and make small adjustments. And to be honest, that's kind of true of DPS, and that's essentially what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a general DPS Fate and Dungeon setup. So I'm going to start with the DPS setup I have now and basically go, do I need you? And if I don't, can I replace you with something a bit better, maybe for AoEs? So, Mimicry, if you can have Mimicry, absolutely you should bring it. Angel Whisper, yeah, it's nice to be able to res. Diamondback is always a good thing. Whistle, well, you certainly can Moon Flute, but you probably won't Final Sting. Unless it's the very last boss, but otherwise, if you're Fate farming, the last thing you're going to want is to have to die and wait for somebody to res you. Just, you're gone, bye bye, don't need you. You still want to have Bristle for Song of Torment for boss fights and for dungeon bosses. That's still good. You still want to have whatever your preferred primal actions are. I would say maybe go for J-Kick instead of Quasar in this case, because chances are, unless you're doing this with people you really know, you're probably not going to see Condensed Libra, which means you're not going to have the benefit of being able to use this when it's the right Libra version. So I would say replace Quasar with J-Kick. You're still going to want your Magic Hammer and Devour just because they do good amount single target damage for your, once again, boss fate and dungeon bosses. You're still going to want your Weaving Windows. These things are things you're still going to want. And absolutely Missile, level 5 death. These are all great to have. But, like, Moon Flute can be annoying in Fates, depending on how quickly they die, they can actually hurt you. And since this is only for physical, I mean, you can use it, but is it really that worth it just for Transfixion? Not really. So, that gives you 2 spots to put in whatever else you want. So, maybe you'd prefer to have Launcher. Launcher can be fun. It uses a lot of MP though. So I don't know if it's really worth it, but you certainly can. What you might want to use is maybe more AoEs that actually go together. So, you know, playing Protean Wave is nice and all, but knockback is going to be really annoying. Really, really annoying. Electrogenesis, it's a good deal. But there is one other weaving window that we should really make sure we have, and that's the AoE weaving window. And that is Fire Angon. There's also Mind Blast, but Fire Angon is 200 potency. So you should bring that one as well. So that way if you want to weave your primal actions, you don't need to do single target damage when you're facing mobs. So that's one of them that you already should change. Then beyond that, you should pick things that go together. So you can use Aqua Breath and Northerlies, I guess. There's a few other ones you can bring. Petrify and other ones. But I would recommend bringing Ram's Voice and Dragon's Voice. They go well together, they do a freeze, and Dragon's Voice can be really good, especially in Fates, to try to get aggro on enemies that haven't reached you yet. So maybe it's a Fate where they're like coming but they haven't reached you, and so that makes it really easy to get a lot of credit because you're essentially hitting them. So you use that when they're coming, and then you switch to Ram's Voice and your other attacks when they're near. So this is, I think, a much better setup, but you don't need to have both Ram's Voice and Planecracker, and you're also maybe not guaranteed that other people will heal you. So let's remove that Planecracker and put our White Wind back. So at this point, you're still missing Blood Drain. You should be fine. It should not be an issue. I would also say, if you're going to have to pick one as a default, to use Peculiar Light and not Off Guard, because especially if you're Fate farming, there are more mob Fates than boss Fates. So if you don't have a chance to change in between them, you're better off bringing the AoE, magic damage taken increased, than to bring the single target one. And see, this is why it was so hard for me to make a good Blue Mage video, because a lot of this will change depending on your style, what you're doing, and which actions you have. If you don't have all 80, you're going to have to make some adjustments. So that's why there is no details. Summary section, it's all detailed. We're just going to copy. Hotbar, copy, current, 6, current, 1. So we remove Planecracker, which is fine. We could also remove Abyssal, to be honest, if we wanted to. And let's make sure the ones we've added, well, are here. So, Man's Voice, Dragon's Voice, White Wind is back. And yeah, if you want to add another, if you want to add Launcher or Doom, I would recommend taking Abyssal Transfixion off as the one that you take away. We do have Fire Angon. Question is, do we have a space for it? Not exactly. Not exactly. But we can make space for it. Let's remove Abyssal, we don't need it. And that allows us to bring back Blood Rain. See, I'm still even making adjustments now because it's so hard to make a good general setup. It's actually easier to make the other setups. So this way, these are all AoE. And this is where our single targets are. And it also has an AoE. I think that's probably enough messing with it. No more touching. Just leave it alone. It's good now. You could also remove Moon Flute if you're worried about the 15 seconds when you can't do anything, and put in whatever else you would like to have. But these are just general setups, just as necessary, and I will see you for the next video. Bye bye!